Okay, Siman Vav deals with women that are Asuros L'Kohen. Sif Aleph tells you who are Asura L'Kohen, a Grusha, a Zayna, a Chalala. A Grusha, everybody knows what it is, a one who got a get. A Zayna, we're going to see the description of it soon. And a Chalala is a woman that, if her father was a Kohen, a Chalal, then she's a Chalala, or any other form of Nischala L'Kehuna. That's Midiraisa. Midirabanan, also a woman who underwent a Chalitza is also Asura L'Kohen. If you have a Suffolk Grusha, you have to, Mechaber says, you still have to give her a get. You have to divorce her if a Kohen marries a Suffolk Grusha. Mechaber says even Reach HaGet is also Paisel. The Ramah, we're going to soon discuss what does Reach HaGet mean. The Ramah says even if she was Nizgaresh only because of Koil Kiddushin Ve'alma, and it's clear that there's no Kiddushin, still in all, since she got a get, she's Asura L'Kehuna. Not Asura, she's Psula L'Kehuna. Psula L'Kehuna means not Midiraisa, and there is a Machlekes. The Bach says it's only L'Chatchila, and therefore Nisus L'Teitzei. The Tazna B'Shmuel say that even in this scenario, Im Nises Teitzei. Now, where does this Isser go into play? The Shulchan Aruch, the Makar in Torah is Isha Zayna v'Chalala lo yikachu v'Isha Grusha me'Isha lo yikachu. Kicha is a lashon of Kiddushin. What happens if a Sam Znus of a Kohen with one of these women, does he receive Malchus, does he lose his status in such a scenario? The Rambam holds that no, only if there is, this is in Hilchos Asura Biאה, Perik Zayin Halacha Beis, only if he did Kiddushin and then he was boil her, then he receives Malchus. Otherwise, he is not like a. Tam's Nus, he's not like a. The Ravid is Choylik and says even if there was no Kiddushin, he is still. Sorry, forget. The Ram, he's still like it. Even B'derech is nos. Comes the question, the big question, which we discussed partially in the past in connection to Mamzeres. We will discuss it more now because it's relevant over here. A woman who got married with a only civilly married. First of all, does she need a get? Second of all, even if she doesn't need a get, if she actually went ahead and received the get, does she become Pasal L'Kehuna? And those two questions are interconnected to a certain degree, between one to another. So you have the Minchas Elazar in Chelik Gimel Siman Yud Daled, who he bases himself on the Rivosh and Siman Samach Vav. Someone who marries civilly is as if he is basically telling you that he dafka doesn't want to get married Kedas Moshe Yisrael, and therefore it's like a Pelegesh, and a Pelegesh doesn't need a get. Remember those three concepts. He doesn't want to get married Chuppah V'Kiddushin, and a Pelegesh doesn't need a get, because on those points there will be a discussion afterwards. Interestingly, there's a tshuva there's something from the Shagas Aryeh. It's mentioned in Beis Ephraim, that he says that only that the whole chashash was because of the Moise Bilas Nus, and we were worried maybe he had in mind to do Kiddushin through Biאה, but Kiddushin through Biאה has been long cancelled. It's no longer happening, and therefore, in Bizman Hazeh, we don't say that. Bizman Hazeh, we're talking about a few hundred years ago, we don't say that the Chazak and the Moise Bilas Nus, even if there is no Kiddushin. However, there are some Achronim which disagree with him and say, if Taka that was the thing, the Shulchan Aruch should have written, because the Shulchan Aruch already writes that we don't do Kiddushin through Biאה, the Shulchan Aruch should have written that the Chazak, that doesn't apply when there is no more Kiddushin through Biאה. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention that, so obviously that Chashash still applies. Now, based on those, you have the Chelkas Yaakov, who is called this generation after the war, Chelik Beis, Siman Kuf Pei Gimel and on, and Reb Chaim Oizer, and Kovetz Igra Siman Lamed, and Tzitz Eliezer in a bunch of places, and Yabia Imer, Vad Yosef also in a bunch of places. and based on the Biאה, a bunch of other poskim in Eretz Yisrael, that a civil marriage b'chalal doesn't need a get. And even in certain scenarios, they will even say the Biאה will go even a step further. We'll see soon that even if she does get a get, she doesn't become pasal kahuna. The Gesmoisha says that lechatchila in Even Ezer Chelik Beis Siman Yutes lechatchila you should try to get a get. He doesn't go into a discussion whether if she gets a get she becomes pasal kahuna or not. However, in opposing to that view, we have the Shas Tshuva Safnas Paneach, the Rogachover, Chelik Aleph, Siman Aleph through Daled, that he was very clear that even by a civil marriage, a woman needs a get, and she's also the kahuna. The Melamed Lahoyel requires a get misafik. Yeah, and we're going to soon discuss all these shittas. From that turns into a question about reform and conservative marriages. Do you need a get from such a marriage or not? And if you don't need a get and you still get a get, you become asur l'kahuna or not. So I had a story, I dealt with one of the first cases I dealt with, Tafshin Gimel. It was a woman who got married in a conservative temple. The rabbi who was Mesader Kedushin, whatever you want to call it, Mesader Kedushin, was the rabbi of this temple. Together with him was the chazan of the temple. Under the chuppah were the parents, brothers, sisters, a bunch of other people. And there was a double ring ceremony. A short time after the marriage fell apart, and she separated from him. Her friends told her, if you want to get married, you need a get. And she received a get, proper kosher get in the Chashuv Bezdin, because that's what she stood her ground, that she wants a get. Then many years passed, and she met a kohen, and now she wants to marry this kohen. Well, she wanted to marry the kohen, and no frum rav is going to marry a kohen to a woman who has a get. And therefore, she got married in another conservative ceremony to this kohen. And whatever, 20 years passed from then till when I got the question. He became frum, she became frum. And now they want to have a chuppah kedas meisha v'Yisrael, and they bounced off the question to me that I should write the question and deal with Rabbanim to deal with it. The first thing obviously was to see if this person is a kohen, and I don't run to make somebody ois kohen. I did my research and pretty clear that he is a kohen. So the question becomes, what happens with the other side of it? So we started looking through and see how was this marriage. So this conservative rabbi, now when you're doing conservative rabbis in the 70s, they were already starting to go off the deep end, but not all of them were. Some of them still had some from background, and it's a shaila. This one was pretty clear that he was not a frum one, Shem Shabbos. He learned in the Reform college. He got smicha from the conservative college. He got smicha from the Reconstructionist college. Then he became a rabbi in a conservative temple, and he was one of the people who very strongly believed in advancing the temple into the modern ages. He took down the mechitza. He was the one who allowed women and girls in this temple to start getting aliyahs, to become chazanim. He used to sing. No, he didn't allow the women to do aliyahs. When he retired, he told the newer rabbi, because I interviewed the new rabbi, I want to know what he says about the previous guy, that they became mixed seating, removed the mechitza. He convinced the new rabbi that the new rabbi should allow women to get aliyahs. He kept Shabbos in his own house, but he spoke in the microphone on Shabbos. The chazan also sang on the microphone on Shabbos. And there was, like we said, there was a ring exchange ceremony at this chuppah. There was no shilas of Eida. There's a shilas of over the kosher Eidim or not. He was this own rabbi, when he was Masadek Kedushin to his daughter, he also made a double ring ceremony. So now, when we're discussing reform and conservative marriages, obviously one of my first places to look at is in the Igros Moshe. He has
double ring ceremony
that shows each one is mekadosh the other one, so there's no proper kedushin. It's one of the simonim. The fact that she
did it, gave him a ring and said,
give a ring, it's an exchange, both, so it's equal. So there's no kedushin. One of the reasons how you look at it that way. Now, the Moshe has a ton of tshuvas regarding reform and conservative marriages, and we'll go through them. I'm going to go through in very short, based on the years when they were written, because you see how the tshuvas move along and become more and more extreme as the years also, the movements also moved further and further away from Yiddishkeit. So in Tafshin Yud Zayin, this is Igros Moshe of העזר חלק א' סימן Vav. It's talking about a reform wedding. The Seudah was not kosher, and over there the Moshe gives you two rules why this kedushin is possible. First of all, according to the Chasam Sofer, if you have even according to Chasam Sofer, who says that when you have Eidim Ksherim and Psulim, we have a non-Sadi that was kosher Eidim. When you have a Rosha Reformer, then it's clear there's no more non-Sadi and there's no Maisa Kedushin. But he says just make sure that there was, do your research and make sure there was no kosher Eidim. And the second thing he says is that the fact that if you want to say another Ma'isa Bilas Nus, that, and therefore he might have in mind to do Kedushin, that maybe we could have applied it in the time of civil marriages, but when a person, because that's you have in mind to get married, when a person specifically goes and has a reform ceremony, it's clear that they're relying on they're not relying on the Biאה for Kedushin, they're relying on the Reform Rabbi ceremony for Kedushin. And they're relying on the Reform Rabbi ceremony for Kedushin, and that Kedushin is nothing, so therefore he says that it's not considered a Kedushin, and he has another tshuva right after it, Siman Zayin, and he continues discussing a similar case. Now it's clear pretty much that volume of Igros Moshe is printed in Tafshin Chaf Aleph, so it can't be too much later than Tafshin Chaf, the next tshuva. There's no date on it. He says more so when a Reform Rabbi does a Kedushin, then B'chlal you have a suffix if it was done properly. Maybe he didn't do the ring, maybe he gave it to her as a present, maybe it was her ring. And because of the double ring ceremony, there's also no Maisa Kedushin. Now, let's go. The Igros Moshe is not written, the volumes are not written by dates. So the next tshuva I'm going to discuss was written in Tafshin Chai, somewhere in end of Tafshin Chai, beginning of Tafshin Yutes, two tshuvas, one after another. And this is an Igros Moshe in Even העזר Chelik Hey, Siman Yud Beis. And over there he already doesn't require that there should be, that you have to have Eidos on each one of the participants if he's kosher or not, to clarify that there is no kosher Eidim. You don't need Eidos for it. It's enough to just ask the parents of the Chas and Kala, find out who are the guests or any frum people over there. He says, really, you don't even need it. And he points out that every woman is becheskas pnuya. You want to put her pnuya. When she's born, she's becheskas pnuya. And now she's not becheskas eishes ish. So she, unless you want to move her from cheskas pnuya to cheskas eishes ish, you need a strong raya. You can't just do it. So unless he over there he flips it. He says unless there's Eidim which come and say that there was a kosher chuppah, kosher Eidim, and everything was done properly, the kedushin from a Reform Rabbi is considered is considered batel. We'll jump 10 years to Tafshin Chavtes. This is Igros Moshe of Nezer Chelik Dalet Siman Ein Hey. Over there, he says clearly there's no chashash of kedushin in any reform ceremony. First of all, they're not from. They probably didn't even live in a from neighborhood afterwards. So therefore, there's no edus, there's no eda yichud, so there's no chashash. He says, you're going to say there's kol kedushin. He says there's obviously no kol kedushin. The kol kedushin is kol kedushin of reform. That there's a koil, that there was a reform kedushin, and that's not enough. That's not a kol kedushin. It's a kol kedushin reforming, which is not enough of a koil to do it. This is in Tafshin Chavtes. We'll move to Tafshin Lamed.
What is a kol kedushin?
When there's a kosher koil, there was a kosher kedushin. In Tafshin Lamed, which is Igros Moshe of Nezer Chelik Gimel Siman Chaf Hey, he again says that there's no kedushin in such a scenario, either because what they say means nothing, or because they do a double ring ceremony, etc. And therefore he says you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about it bichlal. And he repeats the same thing in Tafshin Lamed Dalet, Tafshin Lamed Vav. It says in Igros Moshe of Nezer Chelik Dalet Siman Ein Vav and Siman Ayin Ches. This is regarding reform. So regarding reform, Moshe was pretty clear. As you look through the years, it's pretty clear what the status is. What about conservative people? Conservatives, the reform went frei earlier than the conservatives. The conservatives, they took some time till they totally dropped everything. So the first tshuva regarding conservative, not reform, is also in Igros Moshe Chelik Aleph, Even Ezer Chelik Aleph Siman Kuf Lamed Hey. Over there he discusses about a get which was written by a conservative rabbi who keeps Shabbos and puts on tefillin. And over there the Moshe stays in the suffix if the conservative rabbi is kosher or not. He says, Taka, when you learn to become a conservative rabbi, you get taught to be an apikoidus. But maybe, like many people did in those days, they went there because he was a frum yid, and this was the easiest way to get a job and for parnasa, and maybe a suffix puzzle. So he leaves it as a suffix that is not really puzzle. But when he goes just 1 year later, in Igros Moshe Even Ezer in Tafshin Chav Beis, Igros Moshe Even Ezer Chelik Beis Siman Yud Zayin, he already says that conservative kedushin is completely possible.
Which year?
Tafshin Chav Beis. It says that first of all, you can only rely on the kedushin of conservative rabbis is possible by definition, unless there are 2 kosher eidim. And he says regarding the rabbi, conservative rabbi, he says doesn't make a difference whether he learned in the conservative seminary to become a rabbi, or he was frum and then he took a job in the conservative rabbi. Sure, he's completely pasul. He's completely pasul edus. In Tafshin Chav Ches, which is in Igros Moshe Even Ezer Chelik Gimel Siman Mem Hey, he says the reason you don't rely on conservative kedushin for anything is because there's no mistama, there was no kosher edim, therefore you don't have to worry about it. And over there he goes back to the Ein Adam Oisei Bilasus Nus, and he says you don't have to worry about Ein Adam Oisei Bilasus Nus, because when somebody goes to a conservative rabbi, as opposed to going to a reform rabbi, more than a reform rabbi, he actually thinks that he's having a proper kedushin, because it was more similar to from Judaism. So therefore, every be'ilah that he does afterwards is based upon the understanding that there was a proper kedushin in the beginning. So that means that he was not boil Hashem kedushin. He was boil al da. He was not boil, not kedushin be'ilah. He was boil al das to have kedushin al das, the kedushin of the conservative. And since that kedushin is nothing, so every be'ilah that comes afterwards is be'ilah znus, and there is nothing about it. So then Tafshin Lamed Aleph, it's in Igros Moshe Even Ezer Chelik Hey Siman Zayin. He discusses over there a scenario of kedushin of a conservative rabbi who the conservative rabbi claims that he's Shemer Torah mitzvahs. Yeah, but some people in town say that he's Oiver Aveda, so he says, as long as we don't have any rayas that he's kosher, he remains pasul. He continues in Tafshin Lamed Vav and Igros Moshe Even Ezer Chelik Dalet Siman Ayin Ches. that every conservative rabbi is becheskas pasol. You don't have to do any chkilu drisha by Bezdin. He's becheskas a koifer, and he's pasol edus. And in Tafshin Mem, he has a long tshuva in Igris Moshe Ben Ezra Chelik Dal Siman Yud Gimel, where he's matir kids that when a woman got married conservative and didn't get a get, and then she got married to somebody else, and he says, over there he goes through a whole long, since it was a tshuva, he goes through it's a long tshuva, and over there he explains barichus the whole nekud. He says, first of all, the conservative rabbi, even if he's shemet Torah mitzvahs, he's pasol. He's pasol, and he doesn't have cheskas kashrus. Why? Just by the mere fact that he's a member of the conservative movement, he's pasol. Happens to be, there's a letter from the Rebbe that's pretty much the same idea, that someone who's a member of an organization of conservative rabbis, everything that he does is tainted by that. He's completely considered pasol. And you don't even have to start doing research. Back to the Moshe, he says you don't even have to start doing research whether this person did say kfirah, didn't say kfirah, he is shemet Torah mitzvahs, not shemet Torah mitzvahs. Doesn't make a difference. Next point, doesn't make a difference whether he did it because he wanted a parnasa or not. And he says even worse, if a person became a conservative rabbi because of parnasa, then he's mamash amumar l'te'avan. So it's even worse than stam. So it's for sure pasol. More so, he says, but in conservative kedushin, usually there is no kasher eidim. And even if you will find two kasher eidim somewhere in the room, you could still say that their edus became, according to shittas of the ritva, that the edus became pasul because of tziruf apsulim. If you didn't specifically specify to have kasher eidim, then the pasul ones become pasul through it. And the last point he mentions over there is that the conservative rabbis becheskas that he didn't do the kiddushin the right way. And even if he does know, is b'cheskas he's not a baki, and even if he is a baki, he's b'chazak, he couldn't care less whether it's done right or not, especially since it's double ring ceremony, etc. And therefore, he is completely possible. And Tafshin Mem in Siman in the Chelik Daled Siman Mem Vav, over there he still repeats all the same things. That a conservative rabbi, even if they say he's shemet Torah mitzvahs, his kedushin are pasol, he says, but still you should find out if there were kasher eidim over there. You should just find out if they were kasher eidim over there. This is the opinion of the Moshe regarding that. Anna Soloveitchik in a Kovetz Hapardes has Kovetz Hapardes Shonos Samachal of Cheveres Beis, and afterwards it went into Tchumen Chelik Chaf. There's a tshuva from Anna Soloveitchik, who also a very lengthy tshuva to explain why conservative kedushin are considered pasol. Now, there's a lot of tshuvas that discuss this idea that I mentioned, that when you have psulim and ksherim in the kahal and you weren't meyached edim ksherim, then the psulim automatically invalidate. The psulim join with the I'm saying if they were meyached edim psulim, and so the fact that there's Eidim Kshedim over there doesn't help because they all join together, and it's an Eidus that has partially kosher and partially pasul, and that's discussed in Mari Bruno, Siman Lamed Hey, Zichrin Yehuda, Siman Pei Aleph, Marshach, Chelik Aleph, Siman Chafei, and a bunch of other ones. Yeah, that is, and the other one about if you live afterwards in a place that is Yidden and is Eidos, that you live together. There's a shur from the Maram Shik and העזר Siman Chafalev that he says that Eidei Yichud only applies when the husband and the wife know that the Eidim are there and they see the Yichud. But if they didn't appoint these Eidim to do Yichud, to be Eidei Yichud, then it doesn't count. So until here, it's pretty clear from the Moshe, the conservative marriage, even if the rabbi was frum, if he's not frum, is considered a kofer, and the kiddushin are considered pasul. So if we would not be dealing with a kahuna case, this would be a very simple case. The first kiddushin are nothing. And there was no Maisa Kiddushin, and there was nothing. Problem begins, here she wants to marry a Kohen. And what did we just say in the Shulchan Aruch? What did the Rama say? That if there is a Reich HaGet, then it's Paisel Kahuna. And we're even Kaifin Oisei Lahoitzi, as opposed to the Bach. Everybody else, we do according to the Rama, it's pretty clear that you're kaifin the husband to be megadasher, whatever it was. The fact is because of the Reich HaGet. The same thing is also that Rama also paskins later on in Siman Yud Sif Aleph that about Machzir Grushosei, that if im niskacha la'acher v'girsha oimeis asur lachzir l'rishin. And over there the Rama says, afilu loy nizgasha like mikoyach kol kiddushin ba'alma, she still can't go back, even if it's only kol kiddushin, she gets a get from somebody else, it's already a problem. The same thing he also writes regarding hamtanas 90 days, waiting 90 days after a get, that even if nizgasha machma is a siman yud gimel, you're also going to learn that im nizgasha machma is kol kiddushin ba'alma tzrich lehamtin. And in Siman Memvav he says Yotza Oleh Koil Sheniskacha Leploini V'Girsha Ein Chayishin L'Oisra Mishum HaKiddushin, but Asura L'Koyin Mishum Koil HaGerushin. That's the problem. The only time when Koil Kiddushin doesn't have an effect is in Siman Memches and העזר, where the Rama says, if the husband says Kiddashtich and she says Lo Kiddashtani, and then she took a get because she wanted to have an option to get remarried, and this crazy guy was walking around telling everybody I was Mekadosh her even though she's denying it, then over there it says that she is allowed to marry his relatives. Some relatives you're not allowed to marry. She's allowed to marry his relatives. There would have been Begeder Arayas because of this get. So the question is this get in such a scenario, what is it considered a Reich HaGet Bichlal or not? When it comes to a what's the shirish of the whole Reich HaGet thing? It's from the pasuk V'isha Grusha Me'isha Lo Yikach. And definitely we're medayik, the Gemara is medayik, that if Grusha Me'isha, only Me'isha, if she gets a get that he says Eret Megureshes Mimeni and you're not mutter to anybody else, that is what the koil, the gerushin, that she is still asura, she's still asura lekehuna. Why is that? So if you look at it, you think about it, you're talking about a case obviously that she needs a get. That means there was kiddushin. Otherwise there would not be a problem. Now what is the logic behind it of a get where he says it's a get only me'isha? So you have the same, I mentioned to you, the Tzofan Spanech, the Rogachover, and Chelik Aleph Siman Gimel, where he discusses why a civil marriages you do need a get. And he explains, when a person does Kiddushin, he does two things. It's two pulas. Pula number one is a kinyan. He koinet. And number two, he's oyser her on the whole world. When he gives a get, he has to do the same two things. First of all, she's koine her own rights again. And second of all, she becomes mutter. She becomes mutter to the whole Welt. So he says, so what's a Reich HaGet? He explains over there, it makes it possible. It says when the husband does only one of the two activities of the get. He's only makne her to herself. But he doesn't do the second peula, which is haret muteres l'chol adam. Then she becomes asura lekahyen. But what happens if he only does the second half? The Rogatchover there says if he only does the second part of it, the muteres l'chol adam, but not haret megureshes mimeni, and he just says haret muteres l'chol adam. She does not become asura lekahyen lu yitzur, that he would die afterwards. She would not be considered asura lekahyen in such a scenario because there was never the grusha meisha, the first peula of it, that is there over there. And so he says, so for kiddushin there has to be a lashon of haret mekudeshes li, which does these two peulas for the kiddushin, and by a get you also have to do these two activities. So therefore he says, by a civil marriage, when a person says, I will marry you, so it's similar to the lashon of haret mekudeshes li, and therefore he requires a get. However, even according to the Rogatchover, when today's civil marriages where it doesn't say I will marry you, a shtar that he writes I will marry you, or any lashon I will marry you, but it's them marrying each other, then you don't have such a thing. And if you do by a Reform and Conservative, you could argue that also according to Rogatchover shouldn't be a problem. Why? Because they're not having in mind to do the kiddushin. The whole reason why he said this is because maybe when he did the civil marriages, they had in mind that he was going to be mekadesh her and osir to the whole welt. Over here, he's not, by Reform Conservative ceremonies, he's not having that intention in mind. And all they do is they're relying on the conservative kiddushin, which is bichlal nothing al pi Torah. And we could say that even according to Rogatchover, she would not need a get to release herself from her husband in a case of a conservative get. But it seems like, aside from the Rogatchover, aside when you go through everything, that the reach haget is always, in the scenarios where reach haget applies, are always talking about when there was a maaseh for sure, kiddushin milchatchila, or at least al kapanim, something that might be interpreted as a kiddushin. So according to Rogatchover, the civil marriages might be interpreted as kiddushin because he says, I will marry you, he writes, I will marry you. Or all the cases of Shulchan Aruch brings are all cases where she would need a get otherwise. The one case where she does not need a get, when she says like kidashtani, over there is where he says loy naseres b'kroivav. Now, the place that the mechaber that this din comes from is from the Rashba. Now, the Rashba has a whole bunch of tshuvas on this topic, and based on these tshuvas is the Biאה is matir in the case of a conservative woman to marry a get to marry a kohen. When we go through these tshuvas, there's more than one tshuvas, about 6 or 7 tshuvas of the Rashba, and to understand why am I giving you this whole introduction is because the Tzemach Tzedek comes and turns over everything is machmer like the tshuvas. Some people focus on the Rashba and make differentiations between tshuvas of the Rashba is machmer and tshuvas of the Rashba is mekel. Comes the Tzemach Tzedek and says, no, the Rashba wrote all the tshuvas. You have to be machmer like this and machmer like that. And based on Tzemach Tzedek, it undoes this whole idea of being materet. So you have. We'll go through. I'll say that the Beis Yosef brings in Siman Yud Gimel brings over there when he discusses a woman that got a get, and then there was a kol psul on the get, and the Bezdin required a new get. He brings a bunch of tshuvas from the Rashba. The first tshuva, this is in the Beis Yosef, not in Shulchan Aruch. The first tshuva is from Chelik Dalet Siman Chav Daled. Over there, the Rashba says that she has to wait three Gimel Chodshei Avchana from the second get. Why? Because the rule is that whenever there is a get from a Bezdin, from then is when you start counting. The same thing is in the second tshuva of the Rashba, That is what we call the Shalsa Tshuvas that were Miyuchasis LaRamban, Siman Kuf Lamed Beis. Over there were a woman that had a coil. There was a coil that she was in Skadish to the oven. Then she got engaged to somebody else. And they made Chikirim Drisha. And they saw that there was no Kiddushin to this Reuven. They still required a get. And over there he says that she has to wait Gimel Chotshei Havchana over there. Why? Because there was a koil that she was Mekudeshes and the Bezdin therefore required a get. So therefore she has to wait Gimel Chotshei Havchana. That's so far went through two tshuvas of the Rashba. Third tshuva of the Rashba is a Chelik Aleph Siman Tov Kuf Nun. That they made a takana in a certain city that every Kiddushin has to be in front of a minyan, and there was a woman that got engaged to somebody, and the engagement fell apart, and the father of the girl was Namaritz, and somebody told him, hey, your girl, even though she only had an engagement, she might need a get, and he went and he made sure that his daughter got a get even though she was only engaged. And then this daughter went and got engaged to a...
When you say engaged, you don't mean Edison.
Not Edison, engaged like today engaged. Nothing, just engaged, chas and kala. No kiddushin, no nothing. And then she got engaged to a kohen. And the shaila is if she's allowed to or not. There was no kol kiddushin, there was nothing here. Just an engagement, but there is actually a get. There the Rashba says that she's asura l'kohen. Why? That being that the husband, the chassan, agreed to give a get, obviously means that maybe in his mind he did do something, some form of kiddushin. Maybe he didn't do it in front of 10, maybe there's something there. And even though Medina, he says, we would not require a get in such a scenario, being that the get was already given, she cannot marry a kohen, and more so because he mentions over here also that if people are going to hear that there was a get and then she married a kohen, that's going to be, they're going to think that Chachamim were mated, that the Chachmei Ha'ir were mated a grusha to a kohen, and it's going to be a problem. These are the first three of the Rashba. Comes now to the fourth tshuva of the Rashba. This is, the Beis Yosef brings this tshuva also. It's not printed in the regular Sefer Shuvas Rashba. There's a book called Adaita de Rabbanon from Alifandri, and in there he has like 6 tshuvas of the Rashba in the first beginning. So it's Siman Daled over there about Almana that people started spreading rumors that she was in Skadish to Reuven, and Reuven took a shvuah that there was no kiddushin. But still, because he was being bashmutzt about it, he agreed to give a get. And over there the Rashba says that again she has to wait, three months. These are the first 4 tshuvas that all seem to be machmer, pretty much. Then the Beis Yosef comes and brings a 5th tshuva from the Rashba. This is also in the same Adaita de Rabbanon Siman Beis. That seems like it completely contradicts all the previous tshuvas. And that is, there's a woman who got a get l'Ravcha de Milse, he says. Why? There was a kol kiddushin, but it wasn't a kol gomur. There was rumors, certain rumors, not a real kol kiddushin, and therefore people didn't want to marry her. So therefore she went and she got a get. And the shaila is that she has to wait 3 chotshei havchana. And the Rashba says over here that she didn't need a get, and even though he gave a get, she does not become pasal kahuna, and even though it's not get me'isha, it's not grusha me'isha, it's grusha me'ish acher. It was never isha, so therefore there's no grusha me'isha, and therefore she's not pasal kahuna, and this whole get is not a get, it's stam chaspa be'alma, doesn't make her pasal kahuna. These are the 5 tshuvas that the Rashba brings in Siman Yud Gimel. There's 2 more tshuvas of the Rashba that we're holding at 5 tshuvas so far. 2 more that are also seem to be mekel. They're not mentioned in the Beis Yosef. One is in Chelik Vav Siman Aleph, that he says there was over there it's again a story where a person, his daughter got engaged to somebody, not married, and then the father wants to marry her to somebody else. So suddenly this boy who was not happy that his Shver, he wanted the guy that he wants to marry his girl, that the girl's father is not willing to marry, starts spreading rumors that I was mekadesh her through a shliach, and even brings Edom. And he actually went and gave a get to this girl because the Bezdin said, and then she went and she got married within 3 months of the get, and the Rashba over there says that being that the father of the girl and the girl both denied there was a Kiddushin, there's only one aid that testifies against them, so therefore the get is bottle, is bichlal not needed, and therefore she doesn't have to wait because there's no grusha meisha. And he says there's no reach haget, and she would have been able to even marry a kohen. In Chelik Dalet, Siman Shin Dalet, the Rashba has a similar case, and again with a shliach, with the person that was engaged, and after she was engaged to somebody else, he went and he spread rumors that he was mekadesh her through a shliach, and they requested a get over there, and the Rashba says you don't have to wait. And some of the reasons he says is, first of all, kol kedushin has to be muchzak in bezdin. Over here, there's no need for a get. There's not get meisha, and therefore you don't have to worry about it. And he says a klal gadol, that any time that there's a get which is completely not needed, it's as if it doesn't exist. Therefore, she's not considered a grusha. Therefore, she is asura. Therefore, she is muteres. Therefore, she is muteres lekehuna. So you have 4 tshuvas from the Rashba that seem to be machmer, 3 tshuvas from the Rashba that seem to be mekel. Now, so there's still in the Rashba. The Darkei Moshe brings these tshuvas and says, you have a stir over here. You have some one way, some the other way. And he says very simple difference between the two. He says the reason why the place where the Rashba was matir was in a place where the Bezdin didn't require a get. If you look carefully, you'll see that the first 4 were tshuvas that the Bezdin required a get, and therefore the Rashba said that is a reich a get. The 5th tshuva is one that it doesn't require a get. The people pressured him to have a get, and therefore she does not become pasul. So it means that the koil kiddushin and the get, which is pasul, a woman to kahuna, is only a get which was done by requirement of bezdin. However, that's in Darkei Moshe. And the Shulchan Aruch the Rama Bichlal doesn't mention this difference. He just says simply in Siman Vav we say if there was anytime she receives a get because of koil kiddushin, even if it was clear that there was nothing in the kiddushin, she becomes pasul kahuna. And he brings, the Mechaber also says lesser, and the makar that's written in the Rama is straight from the Rashba. So the Chalkas Mechagi comes and asks a shaila, l'chayra the Rashba contradicts each other. And he says, v'yesh l'chalek, between the tshuvas of the Rashba, doesn't tell you what the yesh l'chalek is. The Beis Shmuel brings the explanation of the Rama and Darkei Moshe that we mentioned, and he just says that what the Darkei Moshe says is not a good enough reason, because if you look carefully in the tshuvas, one of the tshuvas that the Rashba brings, that the Beis Yosef brings from the Rashba l'Achmer, is in a case where Bezdin did not require a get. The 3rd of the 7 tshuvas, the Bezdin did not require a get. So therefore, he says like this. He says, that specific one is a yotzim min haklal. Why? Over there, he wasn't pressured to give a get. He volunteered to give a get. The reason he volunteered to give a get, so we're choishish, maybe deep down in his mind, he did have in mind to do some form of kiddushin. But in the tshuva where the Rashba's mekel is in a place where the girl clearly denies that there was kiddushin, and the father of the girl denies there was kiddushin, and there's only eid echad, and therefore the get is not is not enough over there. But in סימן Memches, where we mentioned about that a man says Kidashtich and the woman says Lei Kidashtani, and then he gave a get. Over there, the Ramah says she's not Neser B'Kreva, which l'chayra mashma that she's not Neser Kahuna either. So over there, the Chalkas Mechayikim and the Bishmul both ask that's a stira from there to here, and they leave it at Tzarechiyun. Now, there is something interesting. There's something in the back of your Shulchan Aruch, I don't know if in this print, but in the newer print, there's something called Beis Shmuel Madura Kama. It means Beis Shmuel first wrote the first version of Beis Shmuel, and then he wrote it again. Some places he was more Meirich, some places he was more Mekatzer. Punkt in this one, in סימן Memches, in Madura Kama, he's more Meirich, and over there he does give a teretz in Madura Kama. The teretz that he says over there is that in סימן Vav and every other place we're talking about a Kol Kedushin that was Huchzak Bebezdin. That there was and therefore, in all the places talking about a Kol Kedushin was not Muchzak in Bezdin, not Muchzak Bichlal in Bezdin, and therefore, Medina you would not need a get, but being that Bezdin required a get, that creates that the coil became a stronger coil. Because a get was given by request of Bezdin or Bichlal, then that makes the coil which had no koyach to become a strong coil. But in סימן Memches we're talking about that there was no coil Bichlal. Stam he comes and says, and therefore in such a scenario we're not choishish to such a get. So it comes out from each one of these scenarios, each one of these explanations, there is a certain scenario where a get will be given and a woman will not be asura lekehuna. Comes the Tzemach Tzedek, and all these are explanations to Metaz of Stiras in the Rasha. Comes Tzemach Tzedek, Even Ezer Siman Kuf Chavtes, and turns it all over. Over there we're talking about a person that wanted to get engaged to a girl, and it didn't work out. And then she became engaged to somebody else. She got engaged to somebody else. And now this first guy, I guess he wasn't too happy with the results, and he started spreading rumors that he was mekadesh her in front of people. He knows that he can't, he's not going to marry her, but Pashut, because he wants to be matzel her from Isser, matzel the new guy from Isser Eishes Ish, he wants to give her a get. He spread those rumors in town. And so they ask him, you have Edom? He says, no, I was mekadesh in front of Edom, but they left town. I don't have any Edom now. And that's what he says. The woman says, there's no Maisa Kedushin. There's no Maisa Kedushin B'chlan. So Tzedek over there answers, she could get married without worrying about this guy who's spreading rumors. Why? Because she is makhish, what he says. She says, I never got Kedushin from him. And he has no Eidim. And there is no Kol Kedushin, which was proven Bezdin. And therefore, she does not need a get medina. She doesn't have to wait until it's nisbarer, and therefore she doesn't need a get bichlal. But he says the Shoy, the Rav who asked the question, said maybe since the person who says that is not in the Geya B'Davar, maybe he's like Eid Echad, maybe it's better that he should give her a get. And the Tzemach Tzedek says that no. He is considered Negeh B'Davar. Why? Because what's going to happen? He's going to come to Bezdin. It's a trick. He's going to come to Bezdin. He's going to start talking about making a get. Then he's going to say something during the get that's going to make the get puzzle. And now she has a puzzle to get from this guy, and now she has to marry him. Because there's a get, and the get became puzzle. She can't marry anybody else. So maybe he wants to do such a trick, and therefore don't do it. And he says, and even though the Ramah says that when a woman denies that she got Kedushin and a get is given, it's not enough to be oiser her b'krayvav. He says the Chalkas Mechaykik over there is chaylik on him, And from the Rashba, it seems like it's not so. And then the Tzemach Tzedek comes and brings the stiris in the Chuvas of the Rashba that are brought over there. And he says, you cannot go and make these chilukim between the different Chuvas and say it's talking about this case, it's talking about that case. It is a stira without a teretz. And if you're going to look at the Chuvah, that Rashba is more mekel. Over there it's even a bigger stira, because over there was a echad and he was still mater her lekehuna. And in the third Chuvah, which was machmer, which is more machmer, there was no edim and he was still aiser lekehuna. So therefore he says you have to be machmer like the Rashba in all scenarios, that even that whenever she gives a get, she receives a get, even if there was absolutely no need from it medina, she's still considered a grusha and she becomes asura bekroivav, and b'meila she l'chayr is asur likahuna at all. Now, so that is, look for the Tzemach Tzedek, there is a way of explaining that that even the Tzemach Tzedek, it's all the chuvas of the Rashba, if you look at each one, there was some form of Kol Kiddushin over there. It was not Kol Kiddushin Shulchan Bebezdin. There was something that there was a proper Kiddushin. Someone said that there was a Kiddushin. Maybe it wasn't the Kol Shin Chazak, but there was something there. But in each one of these 7 chuvas, you have a scenario where there was a claim that there was proper Kiddushin. But what are we talking about over here? That there was no proper Kiddushin. There's no Kol Kiddushin, because the most is going to be is that there was a Kiddushin in a Reform and conservative marriage. So you could say, maybe, that according to the Tzemach Tzedek, in such a scenario, it would not be a get even to make her pasul l'kehuna. You want to go and say maybe it's a difference whether Bezdin required a get or Bezdin didn't require a get. You see from the Tzemach Tzedek himself, that Tzemach Tzedek specifically said not to require her to have a get, which means that if there's a get given not because of a requirement of Bezdin, and you have no Kol Kiddushin whatsoever, but it's Reform conservative, maybe he would be mater. Yeah, but that's regarding Kol Kiddushin. There's a whole other issue with the Chuvas of Tzemach Tzedek. Another issue that you want to say by Reform conservative or these marriages that there's no Kiddushin. Tzemach Tzedek has a tshuva about a person who was Siman Kuf Lamed Ches, a person who was meyached a woman without Kiddushin. He was nichnas v'yoytz in his house, and he has a kid from her. And now he wants to leave her and marry somebody else. And the question was, does she need a get from him? And the Tzemach Tzedek over there paskins that she's like a pilagesh and she does need a get. Doesn't paskin like the rivash. And he says because she was miyuchedes loy, she's like ishtoi, and she needs a get to be able to marry somebody else, even if you were to consider her like a pilagesh. And so now, if you think for a second, why by a pilegesh is a machlekes about whether she needs a get or not? In this case, what would make sense is, the way to explain the Tzemach Tzedek is, that there is no Kol Kiddushin, but there's potentially Kol Kiddushin. Talking about a frum yid living with a frum woman and having a kid. So people are going to say that there was a Kiddushin over here. They're not going to say it's a pilegesh. They're going to say there was Kiddushin, so he's also a pilegesh, needs a get, but they're going to say there's a Kiddushin. I say bilas nus. So you're going back to the topic of Kol Kiddushin. That's the simpler way of understanding it. But if we go back to the point, if there is no chance there's going to be a Kol Kiddushin, because the Kol Kiddushin is fakert, you have a Kol Kiddushin of conservative or reform, maybe in such a scenario, even the Tzemach Tzedek will still say that this woman does not need a get, and b'meila she's not asur l'kehuna if she doesn't get a get. And if she does get a get, but it's clear that she does not need a get and there's no way for a kol kedushin to be here, maybe it's an achzedek would be matter. Maybe.
Is it privileged?
If she gets a get, yeah, if there's kol kedushin, it seems so.
No. What's the get or privileged?
The machlek is if she needs a get or not. The majority of people say she does not need a get. The achzedek seems like she does need a get. There's no kedushin, but since they're living together, miyuchedes, so it's a machzedek is machmer in such a scenario that she would need a get. The Ravadi,
Where are you seeing that some machzedek that has anything to do with kol kedushin?
It doesn't. I'm saying is that I'm trying to say because the whole svara for the people who are machmer by a pelegesh for a get is the Maram Padva, and he's basing himself on kol kedushin. So I'm saying is the machzedek who wants to be machmer by a pelegesh. Maybe that's the reason, but you can't say for sure. If you want to take.
From one of the Isn't it right from that? A pelegish needs a okay, fine. But you said, so the sherish of the sheet that a pelegish needs to get is connected to kol kedushin.
Yeah, that's what it seems like it. Now, Rav Yosef in a long tshuva, which was later printed in Chelik Yud Aleph, in the Biאה, he is makel in such a scenario.
Everything which the Ausert creates something which could be mutter, like
yeah.
Or whatever. So it says over there, who wants to try Yitzhak should be Mary Gerushas Chavere, and the guy that the Pelegish needs to get, that should recite the Pelegish of Chavere without a get that, and more supposed to be used to. Yeah,
but if it's a pelegish, which is miyuchedes loy, and there's a shaila, that's the whole thing. If there's the only reason why she would require a get is if there would be a reason to say why she would need a get. Otherwise, not. Now I'll move to another topic. I have to go through this quickly. Sivav. Shulchan Aruch says a kohen that marries one of the psulas or machrem him. Happens to be that what does machrem him means that if you look in, this is not an Even HaEzer, but you look in Erechayim, Alter Rebbe, Siman Kuf Chav Ches, If Nun Aleph Nun Beis Nun Gimel. Over there it says discusses a kohen for Nesias Kapayim. Over there the Alter Rebbe says that a kohen in Siman that a kohen which became from a different religion can't do birkas kohanim. But sh'ar averos chutz v'meimer dosi v'shoifech damim afilu giloy arayos you not prevent him from doing nesias kapayim. Right. So any other avera except for killing and mumar, he's allowed to do birkas kohanim. That's Siman Sifnun Aleph, Sifnun Beis. The Alter Rebbe adds a Chilul Shabbos of Farhesi is different because it Kenachri L'chol Devreim, and therefore he's also cannot duchen if he's Mechal Shabbos. And but someone who's a Meimir Dosa is a Knas, and someone who is a Reitzeach is Yadechem Damim Malo, and therefore he can't do birkas kohanim. Siman Kuf Chav Ches. And then Sifnun Gimel comes and Alter says, all these averes, Kuf Chav Ches in Erechayim, all these averes are only averes that are relevant to the whole Klal Yisrael. But if he's over on a mitzvah which is specific to a kohen, and specific to a kohen, the Chachamim were kindness him and they passel him from all the things that are relevant to kahuna. For example, a kohen which married a grusha, or a chalutza, or somebody who became tamei ta'ameis. All these ones becomes passel from how do you marry a grusha b'shoigeg? Still, he did something which a kohen, maybe I don't know if it's b'shoigeg or not, but anything which is specific to a kohen, he becomes possible to do nesias kapayim. Comes a shaila, what happens if a kohen is married to a goya? Shas come up in Chabad. Says, is he puzzle from biggest Kenyan or not? Alter Rebbe doesn't mention puzzle, married a guy. And marrying a guy is an isur which is for a whole Klal Yisrael, not only for a kohen. It's not an isur, specific isur to a kohen. So there's a svara to say that it's different. It's like a mechal Shabbos not the farhesi, or somebody that eats not kosher, and the other things. So Ken Zayin, and someone who's married to a goya, the shiksa is less of could be Nesek Apayim, while someone who's married to a grusha is not being of Nesek Apayim. But that all depends on how you look at the next sif in Shulchan Aruch. Sif Ches, the Mechaber says, Ezir Zayna, anybody who's not Jewish, first one that he mentions. That is the Chashayla, Kohen marries a goya. So there are a few ways of understanding it. The Chelkas Mechaykik Taka has a problem with it. It's a stira to the end of the sif, which a giyah says, how can it be a kohen marries a goya? So it's a stira to the end of that mentions a giyah. Or you could say that he holds not like the Rambam, that even Baal without Kedushin is still Asur, or that the Goy is Be'etzem Zayna because she's a Geder Zayna because she was Nival to a Goy. She's not Asur Mitzad being a Goy, she's Asur Mitzad that she was Nival a Goy, so she becomes a Zayna. There's different ways of looking at it, but that's first part. Then the Mechaber continues and says which other ones is there. Bas Yisrael, that became Nival to a person to whom she is Asur to get married to. He's a Jewish girl who was with a Goy, who was with one of the Arayas, with a brother, with a father, and with all those ones, or she was Nival to a Cholol, but not a Pnuya Shezinsa. Pnuya Shezinsa with a Kosher Yid, she's still Kosher to Kahuna. Right, it's an Isser, it's an Isser, and it's not a specific Isser to a Kohen, and not a Asur Law. And a Nida, Shenivala, even though she's Nival in a Isser, it's also an exception to the rule, and if her husband dies, she is allowed to marry a Kohen. Then he mentions a Gioiris, and the Mechaber takes the approach, even if she's less than 3 years, she's still a Surah, she's still a Gioiris, she's still a Surah Kohen. And that just clarifies that the Mechaber does not paskin like Rashi, that Rashi, the way the Bishmul understands, not the Bishmul, the way the Bishmul brings this Rashi that a Gioiris, even if only if she was Nival al-Akum, she becomes possible, but Stamazoi she's not. And the Chachmas Shloimeh points out to you right away that's only talking about under 3. But Rashi disagrees with under 3. But the Mechaber's Machmer, the Gioiris under 3, is Asura regardless of whether anything happened between her and a guy or not.